Tim Macey, you've come to the end of your 13 years wardenship now. Could I ask you, what does it feel like to sit here being interviewed?
I suppose there's a certain sense of unreality in that I've been expecting this time to come for quite a while now, and now that it has actually come, the pace of the term, I think it probably won't really hit me until the term is actually over, because the bells still ring in the morning, you still have to get up, corrections have to be done or reports written. So that momentum is still there. So there's a certain sense of unreality, I suppose, behind this interview.
What I really meant also, though, was, do you like sitting talking about yourself?
I don't mind talking about myself. I must have find cameras quite daunting, but I'm beginning to get used to them, so I hope I'll get through this.
Okay. We're actually sitting in your beautiful drawing room, which, more than any other warden, you've allowed us to use, and many of us have made use of it. You will be the last warden in the history of the college to live full-time and raise a family in this house. Could you tell us about how your attitudes changed, and Pauline's as well, because they did, towards living in this?
And my daughter Vanessa, most of all, who when she arrived at the age of 2, stood at the bottom of the stairs and burst into tears. And she was asked by Dolores, what do you think about living here? And she said, it's very big and rattly. Because her bedroom, the wind really does rattle. I suppose we've all become much more accustomed to it. It is a very gracious house to live in. And while the inhabitants may not always have been gracious, they've certainly been very welcoming. And I suppose we've just, as we've become more accepted, we've also accepted others. And the lack of privacy that was quite oppressive initially, we gradually ceased to notice it, really. And in a strange way, though, there is a peculiar sort of privacy here, in that when we go upstairs, and we're very much understood to be off duty by everybody, and people are very good about that. So I suppose it's not as I suppose what I'm really saying is that we became more integrated into the whole school community, and as that happened, then really we didn't worry about whether we were on public display or not anymore. But there is no doubt there's a huge difference when you get to the holiday time and you can come down the stairs in your pyjamas and your slippers at any hour of the morning. It's very pleasant. It's, some kind of a payback for having to share the place with everybody for the rest of the year.
Do you think that the Haslets, your successor, looked on the idea that they'll be here for a year until their house is built with some trepidation of living right in the middle of us all?
Yes, I think they've been, for the little I know of them and the 2 or 3 meetings I've had with them, I think they've been quite businesslike about it, and they would see it as being a necessary evil almost for the year. Whether evil is too strong a word, I think it's something that has to be done, and they're quite businesslike about that. I'd be a little bit concerned for the children, who will have to make 2 moves in 2 years. But it won't be, it's a move of house, but obviously not a move of job. We had the same thing in Newtown. We moved from one building to another, while obviously continuing with the same job. I don't think it's so disruptive, really, to be honest, because from a children's point of view, they'll have their classmates and their friends and the same teachers, so it's not a big thing, really, whether they're living down the road or here. Yes. It shouldn't make that much difference.
You mentioned Newtown, and of course, you taught in Newtown and were headmaster there before becoming warden here, and you taught in King's Hospital after qualifying as a teacher. What were the differences that you, in being a teacher, first of all, and then being a headmaster, you're teacher in 3 schools, and then a headmaster in 2 of them. What were the differences, or were there any you could say that would immediately spring to mind in your experience with those three schools?
Well, there were lots of differences. The biggest single jump, I suppose, was from being teacher to being headmaster in the same school in Newtown.
What was that like?
That was an extraordinary experience.
How long had you been there before you became?
I'd been there for 5 years as a teacher. My first year in Newtown, there was a former Columban member of staff, Maurice Wigham, who'd been headmaster for 17 years. It was his final year, and he retired at the end of that year. That was a very stable and pleasant year, and I was delighted to be back from my travels overseas, and I was very thankful to get the job. And I enjoyed it very much. There were a lot of remarkable people at the senior end of the school. And then Maurice, and indeed I taught Michael Wilson Wright's mother in my first sixth form in Newtown, which is rather amusing subsequently. And amusing at the time too. She was a very colourful person.
But is there more in a school like this, from your experience of three schools, to learn for an incoming headmaster than there would have been, for example, in Newtown or King's Hospital? Or is it just the same in every school?
I think it's probably the same. I think every school presents its own unique difficulties to be mastered by an incoming person. I don't think one could say that one school would be more difficult than another to master. I think of the kind of schools that we're talking about, which would be fee-paying, would have long traditions, they would have a considerable degree of independence. They would all be very different because of those things. I think in the state system, where you could probably move from one comprehensive to another, and really your only problem is one set of people as opposed to another set of people. The schools would be almost the same. But that wouldn't be the case in the schools we're talking about. Because
the structures would be different and the customs.
Customs and traditions.
What was the most difficult thing here when you came here for you?
There were a number of, I'm answering your question indirectly. When I first came, I was extremely frustrated by the fact, and I remember mentioning this subsequently to other headmasters, and they all agreed that I had put my finger on something. When you go into your second headmastership, it's very different from your first one, because your first headmastership, you don't know whether you can actually run a school or not. You've never done it before. Nobody else knows either. The parents, the teachers, the pupils, nobody knows whether you can do it or not. So you jump in and you just see whether you can swim or not. And everybody's watching and waiting for you to sink. And if you don't sink and you survive, then you gradually win yourself credibility and the school accepts you. Then you go to another school. And the same process happens all over again, with the one huge difference that you know you can do it, but nobody else does. And so you have to go through this tedious process of being tried out by everybody and lacking the credibility that you feel that you deserve. Though it's quite unfair to expect that anybody else would realize that. You have to earn it all the second time.
What way do people try out headmasters?
Not intentionally.
No.
Just their very reactions. You can feel when people have confidence in you and when they don't. You can feel when you can see the question marks sitting on the top of their heads.
I'll give you an example of this. When I saw the first daily notice,
yes.
First time we'd ever had it, I said, this will never last.
Yes.
Perhaps this is an example of something that just because it's new, you say, well, what's all this about? It couldn't last. And now, of course, if you say to anyone at the school, they imagine that there's been a daily notice for 150 years.
The daily notice is a very interesting thing because it has the most extraordinary history, and it relates entirely to St. Columba's and to Newtown, because it was invented by Maurice Wigham, who had been here, but he brought it into Newtown.
He didn't get it from here.
No, he didn't. No. He brought it into Newtown, but it never really caught on in Newtown to the extent that it did here. It was accepted in Newtown. It was a very necessary part of life in Newtown. It went up all right, but it didn't have the following that it has here.
Why is that?
I think it's a lot to do with geography. Because here, the 40-hour board at the end of the cloisters and the notice outside the secretary's office, they get huge readership simply because the traffic flow leads people past them. Also, I think, to some extent, the very fact that St. Columba's is a much more organised school than Newtown, better structured. And it was ready-made, really, for the Daily Notice. I had no knowledge of that at all. It's interesting that you should say that, because it never crossed my mind for a moment. Isn't it? It's funny that the things which you're totally confident about, and you don't realise that other people would be uneasy about. I never had a moment's doubt that the Daily Notice was obviously the way to do things.
Yes.
But I must say, I never believed or never realised that it would catch on so well here. But I think it's particularly suited to the way we work.
That was it. It's such an institution now. We can't imagine not having. Was there anything you hoped to achieve that you didn't here?
It would have been lovely to build some decent dormitories. I'm sure it will be done eventually. No, you see, I never really had any clearly identified ambitions that must be done in my time in St. Columba's. Not really. There were two things. They were much more, they weren't concrete ambitions. They were much more intuitive and I remember well being, as a pupil here, I was very proud of the school when I was a pupil here. And it used to frustrate me sometimes. I felt that, I mentioned this in St. Columba's Day, I felt that the teachers at that time, and they were great men who I got to know much better subsequently, both through their writing and through meeting them subsequently, they had a very deliberate reason for underplaying the things that we were proud of in the school. Now, if we had a rugby team, we wanted them to win matches, and you always got the feeling in the college that it was slightly non-you to be successful. And certainly...
Do you mean just at sports or academic?
Particularly at sports.
Yes.
Particularly at sports. No, to be fair, we were proud of our academic successes, and despite the very low level of work that a lot of people got by with, there were some great scholars produced here, and we had a high regard for scholarship, and it was very obvious that our teachers did too. That was something which was conveyed very clearly. No, I do feel that we felt that perhaps the college could push itself a bit more. That it was.
Do you feel it does now, or in your time has done?
Yes, I think so. I think we have to. I don't think we'd survive if we didn't. I think we're becoming much more aware of it now. I don't think that is funny enough. You should say this to me. It's one area that I do feel I've fallen down on very badly. You said things that I regret not achieving. I don't think I've been very good at this marketing business really, and getting the school's name out and selling the school. And I tried it quite hard. And I must say, in the early days in Newtown, I had to do quite a bit of it because the numbers were down quite badly. It never really came terribly easily to me.
What do you find when you're showing parents around that they're looking for, and that either their faces light up, or you can see we haven't got this here?
Yes. Well, I suppose it's funny enough. It's interesting. You should move straight onto the interview from the idea of marketing, and they are two very different things. And yet, what the interview is a form of marketing, of course, the most important form of marketing. Some parents you just feel, it's like any kind of relationship, some parents you just feel immediately that you're in tune with them. And you're away with it then. You're absolutely away with it.
And others?
Others not. Others you don't know what's going on in their mind. And sometimes you find to your amazement that they're hugely impressed by the college, but they haven't given away an inch, anything. Others, you can see very obviously that their silence is daunting, and you wonder what is going on. As I say, it's not always necessarily negative, but some people can be very hard to read, and I suppose I prattle on a bit too much. But I do feel that it's important to show people as much as possible, and it's amazing the things that light people up too. You can be putting huge emphasis into one thing, and they see something and it catches their imagination. I remember some woman coming to Newtown and a big sales job, and eventually, anyway, she decided yes, she'd send the child. And I asked her subsequently. I got to know her quite well, and I said, "Well, why was it that you sent your son here?" "Oh, well," she said, "I never really told you. My husband remembered playing cricket here 30 years ago, and he thought what a lovely place it was. So there was never really any doubt in the matter at all. And I've been conducting my hard sell.
Well, you talk about loving to prattle, and it's, I think this is probably the very longest conversation I've had with you. And one of the reasons is that we never get time, I don't just mean yourself and myself, to sit down really and talk to our colleagues. You practically have to make an appointment or go on holidays with them. Do you see what I've felt is that huge pressure on the way we work has increased, and that it's a pity we just don't get more time to sit around and talk.
Hugely, and I would counsel caution to those who think that the undoubted achievements and improvements in the college over the last 30 years or so, and the place has improved so much in so many ways, but it has lost other things too, and just because we get more grade A's and B's and so on doesn't necessarily mean that we're an infinitely better school. As I say, I did mention the scholars that were produced by the college in the past, and a fine long list of them. That was a very different system. You'd hand pick your really promising students and you'd encourage them and draw things out. And the old exhibition scholarship system that the universities operated in those days favoured that. But no, to come back to time though, I mean, you've heard the same stories as me. The conversations in the common room go back 40, 50 years, and the conversations, they must, I mean, to be a fly on the wall now, what would we give? But they had time to indulge in these conversations. The negative side is they had time for great hatreds too. I mean, there was bad feeling in the common room that I think we simply don't. I'm sure we are a very pleasant bunch of people and we get on very well, but we don't have time for that kind of negative energy to grow. Also, I suppose we get out of the place much more than they did. It can't be healthy to be living in a very confined space, both socially and physically, as was the case then. So certainly they had time. The pupils had more time. A great deal more.
One of the changes that you instituted, that again, much more serious than the daily notice, but that will be at least as enduring, is that you removed yourself from the position of chairman of the fellows, which all your predecessors, I believe, had held. And you handed that job over to, first of all, David O'Mara and now Jonathan Bewley. What do you think was the main purpose behind it, and what has the main effect been of it, do you think?
Well, I must correct you there. I didn't actually make that decision, except perhaps I gave the final yes to it. But it was David Gibbs's idea. He felt that it would be much more appropriate for the chairman of fellows to be one of the fellows than to be the warden. David came up with that idea. And David O'Mara agreed. And they then put it to me. Well, David Gibbs had discreetly stepped back, but he certainly was the origin of the idea, at least in combination with David O'Mara. I think really it was at least 50% David Gibbs. So when David O'Mara approached me about this, I was very happy to go along with that. Because I had experienced working under chairman before in my previous school, two chairmen, and I realized the sort of the potential of that sort of relationship. And I think it was extraordinary that the college had run as it did run for so long, relatively successfully too. But I think it is very unhealthy because it puts a huge strain on the warden, and it puts him in a quite unreal position. When he's chairman of his own bosses, it doesn't make sense really. And how do you sack a warden who's your own chairman? And how can the warden appeal to the fellows for support and for advice when he is technically their boss, at least within the context of the committee? It doesn't make sense at all. So if I have a really tricky problem, I can go to my chairman, as I have done to all four of them that I've had. I can go to my chairman and say, look, I've got this problem. And immediately it's no longer just my problem.
The other thing that you have done all the time as your teacher in all schools is, of course, to teach in closest contact. We see what they write, and very often they're extremely frank and honest. Have we seen any change? I'm often asked this myself, and I don't know the answer. Maybe I will when I finish teaching. Over your 30 years or whatever it is of teaching English.
I think, if anything, senior pupils, the sixth form level, I think are perhaps more open now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. They've always been pretty open, to be fair. But I think they're particularly so now.
In class or in writing?
In writing, more than in class. In class too, let's put it, the giggle threshold has, when people start getting nervous and giggling at each other, that giggle threshold has retreated away, so that you can say pretty outrageous things in a class now without everybody collapsing into nervous laughter. I think that's a sign of maturity.
Finally, what do you think it'll be like when you walk in here with Pauline next year as a parent coming to ask about Vanessa's progress in transition year?
Well, now, yes, I think I'll have a drink very quickly. And it won't be because I'll be that worried about Vanessa, although that will always be a worry. It'll be grand. It'll be great to see everybody again. No, it will. I wouldn't be too worried about it. I look forward to it very much. I won't be plaguing you that much, though. But I did say to Mr. Farrelly, I'm quite happy to assist the fishing club from outside the college. I know Mr. Atkinson is too. But no, to keep these little peripheral connections will be very. I'd look forward to the odd rugby cup match and things like that.
Good.
But no, the at home will be very pleasant, and I look forward to that very much.
So do we. Happy days.
Very much.